My first apartment in New York was on West 9th Street in the Village. Oh, that was when the Village was still itself, not some obscenely expensive ripoff. And it happened that not long before that, the Clancy brothers had more or less moved in to the White Horse Tavern on West 12th. We loved them. They stamped their feet and threw back their heads, and they were troubadours. And they enrolled us all for the IRA. What did we know? Years later, I read an autobiography by Liam Clancy. He had a few questions about the IRA himself, but it didn't show. I took the music home. Always a mistake. My father sort of harumphed and mentioned that a British Tommy had been shot in the back on a lonely road outside Belfast. I thought, British Tommy, what is he doing in Ireland anyway? Oh, and there were the Clancys. Down by Finnegan's Corner, one morning I did stray. I met a fellow rebel, and to me he did say, I've orders from our captain to assemble at Dunbar, but how are we to get there without a motor car? Oh, Barney, if be of good cheer, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll write that Orangeman, Dr. Johnson, with the news. Tell him it's an urgent case. He should meet us at Glenlaw. And we'll give the boys a jolly good ride in Johnson's motor car. When Johnson got to the railroad bridge, the rebels he saw there. Oh, Johnson knew the game was up, for at him they did stare. I have a permit to travel near and far. To hell with your English permit, we want your motor car. Oh, what will my loyal brethren say when they hear the news? My car, it has been commandeered by the rebels at Glenloo. We'll give you a receipt for it, signed by Captain Bob. And when Ireland gets her freedom, boy, you'll get your motor car. The Clancys could make modern guerrilla warfare fun. Time passed. News seeped in. Not fun. Bobby Sands starved himself to death in the Long Cache. Oh, we knew the names of the prisons. And there was the blanket protest. You see, this was the time of the internment. The British government declared that it could pick up anyone at any time, confine them for an unspecified, without a promise of a trial. The Americans of that era were incredulous. There was also, they also shit in their cells because they said it wasn't safe to go outside. Then I went to Ireland. The Peace Progress Tour of 1994. We were to meet with those on both sides, interview those who had suffered atrocities on both sides, all good non-profits instincts we had, and we were clearly to be non-biased. Well, you know who won our hearts. The Republicans, they told us stories of love and longing and loyalty. The loyalists, the Protestants, they they wanted to debate us. Now, he said, when would you be thinking? What would you be thinking if Texas wanted to secede from the Union? The Americans did not make eye contact. Some of them later said they thought it wasn't a bad idea. We were also assigned, if we wished, to stay in homes. In County Armagh, the British were still carrying their troops by helicopter overhead. It wasn't safe for them on the road. They patrolled with rifles in place. In other words, you'd be going down the street and a car would come by and the men would be on the four sides and the rifle would be pointed at you. I had never had that experience before. Well, one night I was to stay in with Margaret Kalins. I knew that her young husband, Fergal, had been shot at a British checkpoint 6 years before. She was a nice woman, quiet. She didn't seem to mind my going to bed. I went up into the narrow room and without thinking opened the door. There hung her wedding dress in a plastic garment bag. I went to a museum embarrassed to know so little history except my own. Fell in with some others who were walking along and overheard one woman say to her friend, "I would have had that job if it wasn't for my British accent." I thought, accent? That'd be hard. Then I had one other stop on my own. A friend of mine had a cousin and urged me to go. She was had one of those wonderful translucent complexions. She was Anglo-Irish. We hit it off. There's a snapshot of me in her beautifully tended little garden. I have my jacket on and she's in a sleeveless dress. That tells you something. But we walked and talked and I enjoyed her, and she said suddenly, without changing her inflection at all, she said, "Oh, that restaurant. We used to go there from work. There was an IRA bombing, several people were killed." I thought, from work? I was getting on overload. We also could go into the prisons. I signed up to go in Mahabri, a women's prison. By that time, the Brits were picking up some from the other side, and it was notable. The prisoners were in control, and they were not wearing prison garb. Who we talked to for how long and when, the prisoners decided. I found myself sitting opposite an attractive woman in her mid-30s. I learned that she had been married in prison. She had an indefinite term. So I thought, that man, he will never hold you? Human eyes do extraordinary things. Her eyes told me without a word that she knew what I was thinking and she did not need my sympathy. Oh, it seemed bad form. We didn't talk about what she was in for. She had shot a judge. Well, by this time, as I said, I was kind of on overload, and I needed some Quaker grounding. So I looked up at a Belfast Friends meeting, approached someone to whom I had been introduced, and he was a nice man, Big George. He smelled of cigarettes, and he was agreeable, but then I realized I made him nervous. You know, people like me didn't go into Belfast. In fact, Big George didn't especially care to go into Belfast. But I got to the meeting and I was welcomed there and I felt at home, and I met a woman named Marty Rafferty. Turned out, she ran what was called a tea canteen. You see, back in the time of the internment outside of prison, The women and children would come and line up to try and find out about their men folk. There was no bathroom, no cover, and so the Quakers, being sometimes adroit, went to the authorities and said, well, couldn't we just establish a tea canteen and we'll be responsible and it'll be outside outside of any area you need to control. Well, the Brits couldn't pass up tea for anybody, even the IRA. So there the tea canteen was. Now this was all these years later, and I heard about it and I said, could I come? Could I wash dishes? Could I spend the day? And Marty said, well, that could be arranged, she thought. So I went. The canteen was a long room with formica, you know, and it smelled of tea and that other British smell, sausage rolls with too much grease. And way down there, I saw two figures, a man facing a woman, and between them, a girl. She was maybe 9. And they stood absolutely still. I found out later he had just been released, and they had chosen that place to be reunited. I was, of course, intensely interested in mostly women who were there. And you figured out very quickly that what Marty was doing, she was a social worker, she was doing counseling. You could see it in the bodies, the eagerness of the people to talk to her. And I also was interested, of course, in the fact that by this time, as I said, there were loyalists imprisoned, but they talked to each other in that space. Oh, Marty said, yes, if things are very hot outside, do you feel it in here, but not usually. I said, how did they get here? She said, oh, the communities will see that they get here. I said, see that they get here? She said, yes. The communities will see that the women get here. Now, some of those men had been in there 12 or 14 years. I said, if they're in a new relationship? Marty gave nothing away on her face. She said, the communities will see that they get here. I remembered somewhere back in my head a CD of the Clancy Brothers. It was the one that they did at a performance. Where was it? City Hall? Anyway, the audience was picked up on the tape between the numbers, and I could hear what struck me then suddenly as this extraordinary naivete of the audience. I mean, it was us. You know, we were in love with the Clancys. But Marty said, they don't know what the women go through. They were the prisoners. I was disoriented. It's not what the Clancys taught me. She said, Marty was being patient with me. She said, in Ireland, women do not handle the money. Now, they have to do it all. I still play the Clancys in the car very loud sometimes. But you know now, it feels like men playing some boy's dangerous game. It took Marty to make me see the women.